On February 28, 2024, the KDE community achieved something they had been working toward for years. They released Plasma 6 as part of what they called the KDE's Mega Release 6. This was not just another version update, it represented a complete generational shift, a new foundation built from the ground up on modern technologies. The architecture behind Plasma 6 tells the story of this transformation. The desktop environment now sits atop Qt6, the cross-platform framework that powers its graphical interface. Alongside it runs KDE Frameworks 6, the underlying libraries that make everything work together, plus KDE Gear 24.02. The bundle of applications that ship with the desktop. Together, these three pillars form a completely modernized stack. Leaving behind the Qt5 era that had served Plasma 5 throughout its lifetime, what makes this release particularly interesting is the philosophy behind it. The developers did not set out to create something radically different. Instead, they approached Plasma 6 as an evolutionary improvement, building on everything that worked well in Plasma 5 while updating the core infrastructure. Users familiar with Plasma 5 would find themselves at home immediately. The workflow, the layout, the overall feel remained consistent. What changed was everything happening under the surface. One subtle but meaningful shift was the introduction of a new sound theme called Ocean. For years, Oxygen had been the default. Its audio cues, familiar to anyone who spent time with KDE software. Ocean replaced it, bringing a fresh auditory identity to match the new technological foundation. It was a small change, but it signaled that this was indeed a new era, even if everything looked familiar on the surface. One of the more interesting aspects of Plasma 6 is its release schedule. The KDE team committed to a fairly aggressive 4-month cycle for major versions, which works out to roughly 3 releases each year. This is faster than what many desktop environments aim for, but it reflects the project's desire to get new features into users' hands relatively quickly. The schedule has been quite consistent. So far, version 6.1 arrived on June 18, 2024, followed by 6.2 on October 8 of that same year. The pattern continued into 2025, with version 6.3 landing on February 11 and 6.4 following on June 17. Looking ahead, the roadmap shows 6.5 scheduled for October 21, 2025, and 6.6 planned for February 17, 2026. This cadence might not be permanent. The KDE community has expressed interest in eventually shifting to a 6-month semi-annual schedule instead. The idea is that this would align better with the release cycles of major Linux distributions like Ubuntu, OpenSUSE, Leap, and Fedora. But that transition would only happen once there is consensus among those distributions that Plasma has reached a solid baseline of stability. There is another notable change with Plasma 6 that might surprise people familiar with earlier versions. The team decided there will be no long-term support releases. This decision was documented during the 2025 Plasma sprint. Instead of maintaining an LTS branch for an extended period, each release simply receives bug fix updates until the next major version becomes available. Starting with Plasma 6.3, each version gets 6 patch releases containing fixes, while the earlier 6.0 through 6.2 releases each received 5 such updates. So let us walk through how Plasma 6 has evolved. Since that initial release, each version has brought something meaningful to the table, and it is interesting to see how the desktop has grown more capable over time. The journey began with version 6.0, which set the tone for what was to come right out of the gate. The team made 2 significant decisions. The panel now floats by default, giving The desktop, a more modern, airy feel, and perhaps more importantly, Wayland became the default session. This was a big shift, signaling that the KDE team felt Wayland was ready for prime-time. Version 6.1 arrived a few months later, with features that many users had been waiting for. Remote desktop support finally made its way into Plasma, making it much easier to connect to your machine from elsewhere. The team also introduced persistent apps, which meant your applications could survive across sessions, and reboots more gracefully. By the time 6.2 rolled around, the focus shifted toward creative professionals and media enthusiasts. Drawing tablet calibration became a first-class citizen in the settings, complete with a test mode, so artists could fine-tune their experience. HDR support also saw significant improvements, making high dynamic range content look better than ever on compatible displays. Version 6.3 tackled some long-standing pain points. Fractional scaling received a major overhaul, addressing issues that had frustrated users with non-standard display resolutions. The night light feature gained support for IC color profiles, which meant more accurate color temperature adjustments throughout the day. The 6.4 release brought modernization to some older components. KMenuEdit, the tool for customizing your application menu, received a much-needed update. Accessibility also got attention with improvements to the calculator and system monitor that made them more usable for everyone. Version 6.5 introduced some genuinely convenient features. The desktop can now automatically switch between light and dark themes based on the time of day, which is one of those quality of life improvements you do not realize you need until you have it. The clipboard also became more powerful, with the ability to pin items you want to keep around. The latest release, 6.6, continues this momentum. An on-screen keyboard is now built in, making touch devices and accessibility scenarios much easier to handle. The new Plasma Login Manager gives users more control over their login experience, and perhaps most impressive is the addition of OCR text extraction from screenshots, letting you pull text straight from any image you capture. Behind every Plasma release sits a steady stream of updates to something called KDE frameworks. These are the underlying libraries that Plasma depends on, and they follow a different rhythm entirely. While Plasma itself releases every 4 months, KDE frameworks ships monthly, and that consistent cadence is what keeps the desktop environment evolving smoothly between major versions. The process works like clockwork. On the first Friday of each month, developers tag a new framework's release. Then comes a week of testing and packaging before the public release goes out. This monthly cycle has been running since Frameworks 6.0 launched in February 2024, and the plan is to continue all the way through version 6.23 in February 2026. That is a lot of releases when you think about it, but it reflects how the KDE community has matured their development process over the years. Before each tagging deadline, there is a 2-week string freeze. During this period, developers cannot change any text strings that users might see in the interface. This gives translators time to localize everything properly without getting caught off guard by last-minute changes. It is a small but important detail that shows how much thought goes into making KDE accessible to a global audience. Contributors also need to follow some basic quality rules. Any new feature must include unit tests and go through code review before it can land. This is not just bureaucracy for its own sake. It ensures that each monthly framework's release meets a certain standard before it ships. If something does go wrong, There is a respin process for critical issues if a severe bug is discovered after tagging. But before the public release, the team can create a new tarball with the fix included, rather than shipping broken code to users. One of the most significant shifts in Plasma 6 is something you might not even notice at first glance. Wayland has become the default graphical session. For years, X11 was the standard display protocol, and it served the Linux community well. But Wayland represents a more modern approach, offering better security and smoother performance with Plasma 6. Wayland is no longer an experimental option. You have to seek out it is now the default, while X11 support has been moved to a secondary position. This transition brings some genuinely useful capabilities. Wayland sessions now have partial HDR support, which means better contrast and more vibrant colors when your hardware supports it. There are also color blindness correction filters built in, including a grayscale option, making the desktop more accessible to users with different visual needs. Another practical improvement comes in how you log in. Plasma 6 now supports using both password and fingerprint authentication simultaneously. You do not have to choose one or the other. This might seem like a small thing, but it reflects a broader philosophy of making security more convenient rather than more cumbersome. The panel has received some attention as well by default. It now floats above the desktop rather than sitting flush against the screen edge. You can configure it to auto-hide, resize it to your liking, or even turn it into a dock. The idea is to give users more control over their workspace without making configuration feel overwhelming. Plasma Search has also become more intelligent. You can customize how search results are ordered, which is helpful if you find yourself always reaching for the same applications. It can convert time zones, which is surprisingly useful if you work with people in different parts of the world. And it matches text in both your system language and English, making search results more comprehensive for bilingual users. So how does KDE actually get Plasma from a developer's rough idea to something you can install on your system? The process is more structured than you might expect. It starts with what they call repository and soft feature freezes. These happen on the second Thursday before each beta release date. At that point, the list of Git repositories included in the release gets locked down. New features can still be merged after this point, but only if they were already in progress before the freeze and are not considered too large or risky. The team has to use some judgment here, and exceptions are possible when needed. Starting with the Plasma 6.3 development cycle, the team shifted to a 2 beta system. 2 public beta versions are published in the final month of development, spaced 2 weeks apart. When that first beta goes out, everything tightens up significantly. A hard feature freeze kicks in, along with soft UI and string freezes that last through the end of the development cycle. This usually happens on the Thursday following the corresponding KDE framework's release. During this period, no new features are allowed in at all, no exceptions. Even changes to UI text or strings require special permission, and that includes something as seemingly minor as choosing the default wallpaper. Once a major version ships, the bug fix schedule takes over. This is where things get a bit mathematical, and rather clever bug fix releases follow the Fibonacci sequence. The gaps between releases go 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, and finally 8 weeks. It is an elegant approach that front-loads fixes when they are most needed and gradually spaces them out as the release matures and stabilizes. There is also a small difference in how many patch releases each version receives. Versions 6.0 through 6.2 each received 5 bug fix releases, but starting with version 6.3, each release now gets 6 patch releases. This gives the team one additional round of fixes for newer releases.